Hello, I'm Mr. McKinney. I'm going to be going over this lecture video for your Chapter 6 Integumentary System. I'm basically going to be following along with the soft chalk, just so that way those are the notes that you have, the lecture notes, and so that way this kind of follows that pretty evenly. So this video I'm recording will be at the top of the page here, but you also have these two YouTube videos from Crash Course that go into the integumentary system, so definitely watch those. It's good supplemental material. I always like to encourage people to watch things like Crash Course and Amoeba Sisters because they give you a good overview and they tend to teach at about a high school level, which is a nice introduction to these systems. So that way once you come to class, we can go a little more in depth and you already have that background information. So with any of our lectures, if you feel like you're getting overwhelmed, maybe you didn't quite prepare enough before class. So doing some of those videos and worksheets will help. Okay, so starting off with the integumentary system, this is one of the first organ systems that we're doing. So just a quick refresh from tissues of what is an organ. So hopefully you remember that an organ is something that has multiple types of tissues in it. So muscle tissue and nervous tissue, so that way it's able to respond to its environment from nervous tissue, and then the muscle cells can act as effectors and actually changing something, whether that's movement or secretion, whatever it needs to be. So an organ has to have multiple types of tissues. Most of our organs have more than just the two types, though a lot of them will have all four types of tissues, just in different combinations. I say it's kind of like making a cookie. A cookie is basically butter, flour, sugar, and eggs. You can take those four things and make them different combinations. You can get different kinds of butter, different kinds of flour, and you're going to create a different kind of cookie. But essentially, each of those ingredients confers some property onto the cookie. Same thing with tissues. Each tissue type is going to give some kind of property. So I'm not really going to go through the levels of organization. Hopefully that's something you're familiar with, but in case you need that refresher to kind of see how we're building up until we get to the fact that the skin is an organ. The skin is the body's largest organ. It covers your entire body, right? But it has, and the reason it's an organ is because it has all of those tissue types. Epithelial tissue as a covering, right? It has connective tissue holding it beneath there. There's muscle tissue that help our hairs to stand upright, and obviously nervous tissue. You have sensory endings in your fingers, your hands, all over your body, giving you feedback about what you're touching, what you're feeling. So the skin itself definitely is an organ that comprises all four tissue types. The skin, though, when we talk about the integumentary system, skin is just one part of that. The integumentary system is your skin, hair, and nails, as well as things like your glands, your sweat glands and your oil glands that are embedded into our skin layer, that skin portion, and secrete into the hairs or to the pores. So when we talk about the integumentary system, that's the reason why we don't just say, oh, we're learning about your skin, because skin, hair, and nails are distinct things from each other. But we're going to see how they relate and how they work together. Any of these questions, I recommend going through them. You should get the answers, the correct answers, after you submitted them. If not, let me know. I'm gonna keep disappearing and have to pull myself back. It's gonna keep happening. Okay, so let's get into the layers of the integument, starting with the different layers of specifically our skin. We're talking about our integument here. We're talking about the layers of the skin in this case. There are two main layers that compose your integument: your epidermis and your dermis. You'll sometimes hear about the subcutaneous layer, the hypodermis. We kind of mentioned it down here. That's technically not part of your integumentary system. Your integumentary system ends at this dermal layer, and then you can see just below that that subcutaneous hypodermal layer. And so that is part of deeper connective tissues. We teach about it here because there's really not another place for us to talk about it. So we'll talk about it a little bit, but it's not really our main focus. The integumentary system, the epidermis, and the dermal structures, that's really what we're focused on. So the epidermis, epi means upon or on top of, and so you can see the epidermis sits on top of the dermis, that dermal layer. The epidermis is mostly just layers of skin, skin cells, epithelial cells. That's mostly what the epidermis is. The dermis has a lot of those support structures. The epidermis is avascular. There are no blood vessels in your epidermal layers. The epidermis gets its blood from these dermal papillae. There are little blood vessels from the dermis that reach up and kind of project up into the epidermal layer, and they kind of create these little ridges that eventually become our fingertips. We'll see that again. But these blood vessels from the dermis are what give the epidermal cells their blood supply. It's why sometimes when you get a little cut, it doesn't bleed, it doesn't do anything, it hurts a little bit, but there's no actual blood or anything seeping out of it. Then sometimes when you get a deeper cut, you actually do start to bleed. When you have a deeper cut that's bleeding, that means that you've actually gone through the epidermal layers and have gone into the dermal layer. Lots of things that are in here. When you get into lab, you'll talk about those specifically, and we'll talk about them a little bit as we go through this section. So let's start with the epidermis. Right here, you're just kind of looking at this image of the epidermis. This one on the left is kind of a stylized computer-generated one, and this one over here on the right, B, is going to be a microscope slide, a histology slide of the epidermal cells. So what you can notice is that your epidermis is everything that's kind of from this line of purplish cells all the way up to the top where you kind of have these yellowish, these are dead cells, is what this is representing. Anything that's this lighter pink color, that's part of the dermis. So you can see there's not this even layer between the epidermis and dermis. There's not like an even divide. It does go up and down. Again, that's what gives us our fingerprints, are these ridges that we have. So the epidermal cells will kind of project deeper sometimes or a little bit more superficial, but there are 4 to 5 distinct layers, depending on the location, of your epidermis. Each layer of the epidermis is going to have certain characteristics to it, certain cell shapes, cell functions, proteins they're producing, things like that, that differentiate one layer from the next. So as you're looking at these images and just kind of, for biology, when you're looking at cells, notice how do the cells shape change and how do their colors change? How is the nucleus changing? Right? All those little things are going to be hints that you're looking at a different layer of cells. So as you just look at these, you can see you have this dark purple layer, and then it kind of gets into this lighter pinkish kind of layer. The cell shapes are a little bit more odd. They're not as regular as they were in this very bottom layer. And then as we go up, they start to get a little bit flatter. They get a little bit darker, and then they change completely. They kind of change into this yellowish color. And so we're going to see what each of those are. So general characteristics of your epidermis. When we talk about your epidermis, the main tissue of the epidermis is epithelial tissue. So again, thinking that an organ can have multiple types of tissues, well, with the integument, your skin being the organ of the integument, it has multiple types. And so one layer, the epidermis, is mostly just epithelial tissue, which are cells. Specifically, that cell type is stratified, squamous, keratinized. So you'll hear a lot of times when we talk about the skin or the integument, we'll say, oh yes, the stratified squamous keratinized epithelium. And that's referring to this outer covering of our cells. So stratified means layered, squamous talks about the flat cells, and keratinized is a protein that helps to prevent water damage and reduce infections. So you can see as you go up the cells, as you go from this bottom layer more superficial kind of towards the top, this top layer is the one that you can actually palpate and touch. The cells really do start to become very flattened, very thin, and they're yellow because they've been replaced with keratin. All the contents have been replaced with that protein keratin. So this is why we talk about the stratified squamous keratinized epithelium. So now let's get into the actual layers of the epidermis, because again, the epidermis itself is stratified, and then it's got this outer layer that's very stratified. This outer layer here, I'm going to talk about it, it's actually 25 cell layers thick. So you have 5 regions to your epidermis, and then this most superficial region is actually 25 layers thick itself. So starting with the very bottom layer, the stratum basilae. Basilae or basal is always going to mean the deepest. So the stratum basilae is the deepest layer of the epidermis. It's one that actually touches right up against the dermis. These are still living cells. They actually are stem cells, the cells in the stratum basilae. And if you remember, a stem cell is one that's going to divide. And as it divides, it produces another one of itself. And that one goes on to do function. But the other cell, the stem cell, actually stays and continues reproducing. Adults have stem cells all over our bodies that are functioning in this way. So stratum basilae, cuboidal columnar cells, very attached to that basement membrane, giving a good anchoring, securing for the epidermal layer, and that site of continuous cell division, that stem cell layer that's producing more and more cells. Within the stratum basilae, there are other cells that are producing their secretions as well. So the basal cells are the ones that are going to be your epidermal cells, but you always have support cells in the body, things that are going to be adding secretions or immune function or protection, something like that. So there are three main types of cells that are in the stratum basilae: keratinocytes, melanocytes, and tactile cells. Keratinocytes, keratinocytes, however you want to say it. Again, just remembering naming conventions. Cyte is cell, keratino, keratin. So these are cells that produce keratin. These are cells that are going to be the most abundant cells. They're going to be the ones that are replacing the surface cells. They're actually going to be dividing and replacing the surface cells. And they're making that protein keratin. Again, that's giving everything its structure. So when you're looking at an epidermal cell layer, the stratum basilae layer, you're mostly seeing keratinocytes. Those are the ones that are going to become the actual layers of the epidermis. Second type of cells are melanocytes. These are not as numerous, but they're more so than the third kind. So not as numerous as your keratinocytes, but melanocytes are actually going to be producing melanin. So second protein here, we have keratin and we have melanin. Keratin is going to be providing strength, water resistance, that kind of stuff. Melanin is a pigment molecule that surrounds the nucleus, and it helps to protect it from UV damage. So that's why when you typically will see people, or in the sun when we get exposed, our skin starts to get a little darker, we get a tan. It's those melanocytes are producing more of that melanin pigment to protect our nucleus, to protect our DNA from radiation. So getting a tan, while it might be aesthetically pleasing, it is your body's response to harmful stimuli. It is your body's response to ultraviolet radiation, is to produce more of that. I grew up in the South, grew up in Eastern North Carolina. People all the time would talk about getting your first burn of the summer, so that way it would supposedly help prevent you from getting burned later in the summer. It's an awful idea, terrible thing to do. If you expose your skin to that much damage, where the skin actually is getting burned, you are killing those layers of cells, potentially mutating your DNA, damaging your stem cells, so that way your skin is not going to grow back properly. So, if you are going to be exposed to the sun, sunscreen helps to prevent that UV damage. So SPF, the sun protection factor, is telling you how long it's going to be protecting your skin when you use that supplement. So sunscreen is very good for us. It does not absorb into our skin. It just kind of adds this extra layer of protection on top of us, so that way our cells aren't having to work so hard, and to make sure that we're really getting the protection we need. One last thing about melanocytes, because I always find it very interesting, if we kind of connect this back to evolution and human disbursement throughout the world, when you look at populations that are right along the equator that get a lot of sun exposure, they tend to naturally have darker skin tones. And it's not because they have more melanocytes. Everybody has the same number of melanocytes, but genetically some people are predisposed to produce more melanin. So people that are ancestrally from the equator, their bodies are going to produce more melanin, even if they're living somewhere in the poles, even if they live in Scandinavia or Alaska, where they get months of darkness at a year. If you are ancestrally from kind of the middle equator region, you will still be producing that much melanin even without the sun exposure. And then there's those of us that aren't from the equator region. We're more from a little bit higher, a little bit lower, where sun exposure, we're having sun exposure just wasn't as much. Genetically, we don't produce as much melanin, even though we have the same number of cells. So we can still produce some. It's a very interesting thing. If we were in lecture, then I would kind of get us into a whole conversation about, the benefits of having more melanin to protect you from sun versus too much melanin, so that way you aren't absorbing the right amount of vitamin D. We see that kind of shift, and so we might get into that. All right, the third type of cells, the tactile cells. These are also called Merkel cells. I like the name tactile because they reflect what they do. These are for touch. These are touch receptors. They don't have a lot of them. They're sensitive to different touches. There are different types of receptors in your skin. Some are for very soft touch. Some are for very deep, firm touch. Some skin receptors are showing the texture of things. So, is it soft? Is it hard? Is it round? Is it bumpy? Those kind of things. They can help us with all of that stuff. These are releasing sensory neurotransmitters, kind of sending signals to your receptors to be able to determine, again, all those features of whatever it is that you might be touching. When we get into the nervous system, we'll talk about kind of nerve signals and how those get interpreted. But here you can see the melanocytes with their melanin pigments. These are the original nucleus of the melanocyte. These really numerous cells here, these are your keratinocytes, and you can see how the melanin diffuses into them and you have that keratin protein that they're producing, linking them together. Real quick, the basement membrane. So this is a common feature in epithelial tissue, if you remember, because epithelial tissue is cellular. It has to have something that it's anchoring to, something that's holding it together. So the basement membrane holds it to the connective tissue below, and then the keratin molecules help to make these connections between the cells to hold them together. So that's kind of how that anchoring works. As people get older, we lose connective tissue, and so skin tends to tear and rip and bruise easier, get damaged easier. It doesn't quite go back to its shape, right? Like I have very hydrated today, but when you don't have enough collagen, your skin doesn't go back to that original shape. And it's because these connective tissue structures are starting to break down. And so that's one of the reasons, you know, our skin is anchored to the body below. Okay, so that was the the deepest layer of our epidermis, the stratum basilae. Now we're going to start working our way superficially. These next few layers, they aren't as in depth, or they're not as, we're going to go into them as depth as we did for the stratum basilae. So the stratum spinosum. Stratum, by the way, means layer. Stratum is just referring to layer. So the stratum spinosum, these cells actually start to have a spiny, kind of pokey appearance to them. That's kind of how they get their name. So they are differentiated keratinocytes as the stratum basilae, as keratinocytes get further and further from the basal layer, they're getting further from the blood supply, and they're starting to convert themselves. So keratinocytes, they start differentiating into non-dividing cells. They get connected by these protein structures, helping to hold them in place. And there's also some immune cells in here. We call them dendritic cells, epidermal dendritic cells. Depending on where it is, it kind of gets named something different, but they are a type of phagocytic cell. So a phagocyte is one that's going to go and engulf and kind of clean things up. Neutrophils, natural killers, and dendritic cells. So if you hear about a dendritic cell, it's referring to cells that are living in your skin that are breaking down pathogens. So important feature for these is that this is your non-dividing layer, kind of the first of the non-dividing layers, and you have these immune cells in there, these phagocytic immune cells. Next is the stratum granulosum. So this one itself is about 3 to 5 layers thick. So we're already starting to get, okay, instead of just one layer or a couple layers, we're getting thicker in our layers of the epidermis. So this is the region, the strata, is 3 to 5 layers thick. Keratinization really begins here, so this is when a lot of the cellular contents are going to be replaced with that keratin protein. This keratin starts to accumulate, the nucleus and the organelles break down, because again, keratin is for protection, not for, is for strength and water resistance, not for UV protection. The melanin does UV protection. So keratin starts to break down our nucleus. The cells start to get flat. They can no longer repair themselves. They can't make more structures. So the cells all start to flatten out, and you get these tough, protective, water-resistant cells. This is really helpful evolutionarily because it makes sure that any kind of pathogens, any virus or bacteria that try to infect us, when they first go into the cell layers that they first encounter, are mostly keratin. There's really no machinery for viruses to hijack, so they can't take our nucleus and our ribosomes and start making their own viral proteins. It makes sure that any kind of substances trying to get absorbed or go through, they're really not going to be very absorbable through those outer layers. Only certain things are. And so it just kind of gives us this nice layer of protection, like we were saying. And again, water loss. It prevents water loss from us. This layer, the stratum lucidum, is only present in thick skin. So the hands, the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. Those are your thick skin layers. So only in the palms of the hand, basically where you don't have hair. Those are the, and I know you're like, well, I don't have hair on my head. Yes, you do. You have hair on your face. It's very, very fine, thin hair. But you don't have hair on your palms, hair on the soles of your feet. And those layers are typically more abrasive. They're where they're getting more kind of physical damage. And so they need that extra layer for that protection. Okay, so now we're getting into this most superficial layer, the stratum corneum. So if all of this has been a lot, just make sure you know the stratum basilae and the stratum corneum. Those are the two most important layers. The basilae is the deepest, producing living cells. The stratum corneum is the most superficial. That's what you're actually touching when you touch your skin, when you touch yourself, as you're touching that stratum corneum layer. It is the outer layer. It's composed of about 20 to 30 layers of keratinized cells. They are fully dead. They are anucleate, so they're not repairing or replacing or dividing, anything like that. And they just have these nice little keratin sacs. It takes about 2 weeks for them to get there, for them to differentiate, and then about 2 more weeks for exfoliation to occur. For one cell, think about one cell going up and going up. We exfoliate all day long. It's one of the things that we're able to do because these cells are dead and flattened. They're meant to just kind of be shed off, because as you shed and exfoliate, you're also getting rid of any harmful pathogens that might have accumulated on your skin that weren't able to penetrate. So regular bathing, washing, that's what it's healthy for. That's what it's good for, because we're sloughing off those dead layers and it's stimulating new cells to grow. It's a good process to get into. So this stratum corneum creates a physical barrier for pathogens, whether that is a virus, a bacteria, or even just a piece of paper. Again, we talked about paper cuts. Having an outer layer of dead cells that can just get sliced. If you get a paper cut that doesn't actually bleed, it's repairing itself very, very quickly. And it's not repairing itself. Those outer layers have been shed, and the deeper layers can start to push up and replace that. And so that replacement happens very quickly if you don't get below the cornea, or if you don't get below the epidermis. The stratum corneum resists dehydration and makes sure that we're not losing too much water. We always lose a little bit of water through transpiration and sweat, but by having our skin, it helps to keep things locked in. If you kind of think about evolutionary biology, everything started in the ocean, and then it moved onto land, and then it moved back into the ocean. So that's what mammals had to do. We had to go from ocean to land. Once we got on land, we were like, oh, this is nice. It's dry up here. Let's create things to help keep us sealed in. And then we went back into the ocean, and it was, oh, it's nice and wet here. And you come back onto land again. You have to have some way of making sure you're not going to dry out. Life exists in water, and so without skin, we wouldn't be able to hold our water in. Things like beetles have their carapace, right? That helps to keep them from drying out, from desiccating. And so we have our skin there to help resist that dehydration. And it inhibits microbial growth, again, because it has dead cells, and from some of the secretions that we're going to see from our sweat and sebaceous glands, there are secretions there that help to inhibit other bacteria growing. Okay, so those are the layers of the epidermis, the layers of the outer skin. This is where skin color tends to be presenting, so I want to just talk about that for a little bit. Some of the big main determinants, things that are going to decide what kind of color your skin comes out as: hemoglobin, melanin, and keratin. So amounts and distribution of the pigments are going to kind of combine with each other and give you what is your natural skin pigment. Hemoglobin is a molecule that carries oxygen. It's in red blood cells, and it's going to be carrying oxygen. As you have oxygen, if you're like a baker, or if you like to bake or cook or anything, you know that when you take like cake batter and you start whipping cake batter, or egg yolks, and you start whipping egg yolks, you're working air into it, and it tends to make it a little bit lighter in color. And so oxygen tends to make things a little bit lighter than they normally would be. That's why when you look at your blood, oxygenated blood is red. Deoxygenated blood, it's actually not blue. Your veins make it look blue, but it's not blue. It's a dark purple color, because oxygen is turning that dark purple into a lighter red. So that's all that is. Melanin, we talked about. Melanin is that brown pigment, that tan pigment that's going to give your skin those hues. And then keratin comes, a big source is carrots. Honestly, I don't know, it kind of sounds silly because that's the name of it, but that is one of the big sources of it. Any kind of orangish fruit vegetables, or orangish vegetables, carrots, oranges, those things are going to contribute that keratin color. But there's a lot of other things that have it. Carrots are just the one that always come to mind. Okay, so hemoglobin, bright red protein found in red blood cells, gives oxygen the bright red color because it's going to, oxygenated blood, it's bright red color because it's holding oxygen. Hemoglobin, that's what it does. So it gives a reddish or pinkish tint to the skin. So I tend to have very kind of reddish pink skin. This lighting is really highlighting it, but you can see I kind of have this pinkish hue to my skin. I also have this here. This is capillaries. These are broken capillaries. This isn't natural skin pigmentation. But I tend to have a very kind of pinkish reddish flush to my skin. So hemoglobin is the primary component. I don't have a lot of melanin. I don't have a lot of general melanin. melanin. I have, some freckles, I have some spots, I have some places. I can get pretty tan when I like to go to the tanning bed. I do fake tanning beds now. I was in a tanning bed at 13 years old. My mom had me in one, and I did that for a long time. It's not really good for you. It's causing your body to constantly produce melanin. It won't be able to keep up, and you can really cause some skin damage and skin cancer. So now I like a nice spray tan. It kind of is the best of both worlds. So again, melanin produced by melanocytes under stimulation from UV radiation, shades of black, brown, tan, and a yellowish brown, just depending on, again, how much you're being produced, the ratio of producing them. It gathers around the nucleus to protect DNA. And again, primary determinant of differences in skin color. So when we're thinking about those different skin tones, typically it is the distribution and concentration of melanin that's giving us those skin tones. Hemoglobin and keratin are going to really be modifying it. And this is when we kind of go back to that conversation of, well, thinking about people around the equator, they're getting a lot of sun exposure. Sun, we'll see, is very important for vitamin D synthesis. It helps to keep our bones healthy. And so people along the equator, they're getting tons of sunlight, and so they can produce a lot of melanin, they can have darker skin tones, and they're still absorbing enough sunlight. But as humans started to migrate from sub-Saharan Africa, and we started going north, the amount of sunlight we were getting was less. But people were still producing as much melanin. They were still kind of, that process was still happening. And so what was happening is that as humans migrated north, people with darker skin tones weren't able to absorb enough vitamin D because now they weren't getting hit with all of that sunlight that you get around the equator. And so that's why you see as people move further north or really further south, more so north, right? Because that's just how life tends to travel. But any of those directions, you can go north or south, people's skin tones start to get lighter. And that is a reflection of not being able to absorb as much sunlight when you have all of that vitamin D being produced. So that's how you see people from sub-Saharan Africa that can be of very dark colors to people in, Norway that are almost translucent. And it's because their bodies aren't producing melanin. If someone in Norway was producing as much melanin as someone in Africa, then they wouldn't be able to absorb as much vitamin D, and it would be very detrimental to their health. They wouldn't survive. And that's why, as people traveled further north, only the ones that were able to adapt to those conditions were able to continue surviving there. And so that's why we have this distribution of skin colors. It's really just the melanin. Same kind of thing goes for different body structures. Having longer limbs, being taller, helps you to distribute heat easier. And so that's better for hotter environments. As we went north, we got to colder climates where shorter, stockier bone structures were more advantageous. And so all these differences we see, it really is just a shifting, changing into environments. This last one, keratin, yellow-orange pigment from the diet, again, carrots and other orange vegetables. It accumulates in your subcutaneous fat, gives you a subtle yellow tone to your skin, and it can be more pronounced with high dietary intake if you were just really going for your carrots, really going for your orange veggies. I'm not going to say it's going to turn orange, but it can start to, kind of like how I have the pinkishness, it can start to be more pronounced. So the opposite of those, not having any kind of pigment molecules in your skin, is called albinism. So albinism isn't someone that's just pale. It's not just somebody that's pale. Albinism is an actual condition where your body is not producing the enzyme melanin. So in your eyebrows, skin, hair, those kind of things, you are not going to have much of that dark color at all. You have increased sensitivity to sunlight, higher risk of sun damage. And it's one of those things where melanocytes are present, but it just can't be synthesized effectively. So here is something that you can kind of think about, this idea that people who do have albinism, they may not have it completely. So you might have patches where their skin is not producing as much of that melanin, or it could be a full systemic condition. It really just depends. All right, so that was the epidermis. Again, a lot of the important cell structures that we need to see, those layers of the epidermis, as well as the skin color. So now let's get into the dermis. Let's get into that deeper layer. So the dermis is located just deep to the epidermis. It has 2 layers of connective tissue. So where the epidermis had its 5 strata, the dermis has 2 strata that we're going to be looking at. Its thickness ranges. It's mostly made of connective tissue, some collagen that's in there, as well as some other kind of connective tissue fibers. This is providing strength, flexibility, and resiliency to the skin. So the epidermis is going to be providing that kind of protective layers. This is going to be giving us kind of an anchoring place to hold, as well as some modified structures, things like blood vessels and sweat glands, nerve endings, hair follicles, all those other kind of things that you might associate with your skin start in this dermis. The dermis, important to note that it is vascular, so it's going to be vascular and innervated, meaning that it has blood vessels and nerves. So it's going to be responding to stimuli, and it's going to be able to have healing and repair happening. Thermoregulation, sensation, and healing, all functions of the dermis. So the superficial layer of the dermis is called the papillary layer, and it's characterized by the dermal papilla. A papilla is a little projection, and so that's where the blood vessels are that feed the epidermis. These are the ones that become your fingertips, your ridges. They're called the epidermal ridges. So the dermal papilla project up into the epidermis, and it's very, very thin cell layers. And so the blood vessels that are in the dermis can exchange gases and nutrients with the epidermal basal cells, those stratum basilae layers. They also do have some nerve endings in them. Let's highlight that they do have nerve endings for touch and temperature detection. The reticular layer is mostly connective tissue, some collagen fibers with elastic fibers. If you remember, collagen gives strength, elastic fibers allow things to go back to their original shape. So tensile strength, durability, and elasticity. Elasticity is that stretching back, coming back. The last thing here is just talking about lines of cleavage. So this is really important if you're going to get into any kind of surgeries or what am I thinking of? Plastic surgery, any kind of thing like that, are the lines of cleavage. So skin has different types of tension. There are different ways that the collagen fibers will align themselves. And so depending on what part of the body you might be making an incision on, there are optimal ways to make those incisions. So that way when you go to resuture, you're not having to fight against the natural tension of the skin. You can actually bring pieces of skin easier together because you're not fighting these lines of cleavage. Again, dermis is really there for providing strength and flexibility to the skin. It's giving the epidermis something anchored down into. It does have some specialized structures that we're going to see when we get into the specialized features of the integument. All right. Okay, so let's get into the actual functions of the integumentary system now. So this is going to just kind of highlight some of those important features that it has for it. So first one we just already talked about, protection from the external environment, whether that is physical injury, heat or cold, dehydration, those kind of things, UV radiation from the skin, those are all part of that epidermal function. It's waterproof keratinocytes and melanocytes providing water resistance, and UV radiation protection, as well as things like those dendritic cells that are going to go and phagocytize any pathogens. Water loss and gain, I'll kind of put that one in protection, my apologies. But again, water loss, the epidermis is water resistant. It's not waterproof. We are not waterproof. We still sweat, we still transpire, we can't control that. But if you go and put us into a bathtub, you're not going to absorb that water. It's not like you can sit in a bathtub and that water is going to kind of just naturally flow into you. We have resistance to water loss and water gain to prevent those kind of things, whether that's dehydration or water gain and swelling. Fluid balance is a very complex topic. We'll get into that a little bit when we get into the urinary system, but the body really has to play with a solute balance. So hypertonic and hypotonic environments affect how fluid gets moved. There are hormonal signals, blood volume and blood pressure signals that are all going to be regulating that fluid loss. But just go ahead and put in your brain, we don't consciously regulate our fluid loss through sweat. Sweat is an uncontrolled process. It is one that just kind of helps to regulate our homeostasis. But if you have an excess of water that your body's trying to get rid of, you're going to urinate it out. If you have, you're going into liver failure and your liver is accumulating a lot of fluid, congestive heart failure, and you're accumulating a lot of fluid, you're not going to sweat that excess fluid out. You're going to urinate it out. So skin helps to prevent that. And again, like I said, this function is critical for survival on land. Moving from an aqueous environment into a dry environment, we had to develop some way of making sure that we didn't just lose all of our water, because without that, we can't survive. Vitamin D synthesis, so this is the one I was talking about when we see populations migrating from equatorial Earth, north and south, they start to get exposed to less sunlight. Sunlight is crucial for vitamin D synthesis. It stimulates that synthetic process, that process for us to be able to absorb calcium and make sure we're maintaining proper calcium levels in our blood and our bones. So it starts off as a precursor molecule called cholecalciferol that's being produced in our cells, in our keratinocytes. We call it D3, is the nice little shorthand name for it. So vitamin D3 is produced once you get exposed to UV light. The thing is, you only need a little bit. It really only takes a little bit of exposure to UV light to make the right amount of vitamin D. Once you have vitamin D, so starts with sunlight. Here we go. Starts with sunlight, shining down. There we go. Sunlight is going to stimulate the production of vitamin D. Vitamin D is going to get transferred to your kidneys. I'm sorry, to your liver, where vitamin D is converted into this molecule called calcidiol. Calcidiol gets taken to the kidneys, where it gets turned into calcitriol. And calcitriol is a hormone that's going to help to increase your calcium absorption. So kind of 3 steps there. You start with sunlight. Where's my sun? There's my sun. Sunlight activates vitamin D. Vitamin D gets converted into calcidiol, calcidiol into calcitriol. And calcitriol is going to work with things like your parathyroid hormone to try to increase the levels of calcium in your blood. This is really important for things like muscle contraction, neurotransmitter release, fluid balance. Calcium works with that too. And so there's a lot of things that we use calcium for that's important to have. It's one of the reasons why our bones are made of calcium. Okay, so that's the vitamin D synthesis. So again, think about our function, the integument: physical protection, water loss gain, vitamin D synthesis. It also acts as secretion and absorption. There is some that does happen. So secretion, some of the main things are sweat. Sweat is mostly water with a little bit of electrolytes. Sorry, my brain wasn't really thinking about that. No real toxins though. We lose some metabolic waste, some urea gets lost through our skin, but you do not sweat out toxins. That idea that you're sweating toxins, that going to the steam room or going to a workout or to a hot yoga class is going to remove toxins, it's not true. Your body does not do it that way. Your body removes toxins through your liver and your kidneys. If you are sweating toxins, you need to go to a doctor. Something is not right. That's just not how we do things. But it's, it might make sense because, we'll sweat, we're getting out the impurities. No, you're not. That's not what it's for. Sweat is mostly water. It's helping with thermoregulation. That's the process that's what sweat does. It's help with thermoregulation, trying to keep us cool again. Sebum is also produced by what's called a sebaceous gland. So 2 different glands here. The sweat glands are called sudoriferous glands, is a name that you're going to hear for those. I tend to not use that as much because it's just a lot. It's a big word. It's a lot not in that word. So typically we talk about just sweat glands. We're going to see there's 2 types of those. The other kind are sebaceous glands, and sebaceous glands are your oil glands. And to me, sebaceous just sounds like an oily word, the way that it kind of flows off. Sebaceous. It kind of has this thick oiliness to it. And so that's how I remember, sebaceous glands, oil glands, they produce what's called sebum. Sebum helps to lubricate your skin and your hair, so it's kind of released along your hair follicles. It helps to prevent out drying and cracking, and it has some antibacterial properties to it as well to help prevent microbial growth. Absorption. The skin is selectively absorbable, so while we secrete sweat and sebum, only a couple of things get absorbed, typically lipid-soluble things. They need usually a carrier molecule. DMSO is a very common one that will get added to chemicals to be able to absorb it into your skin. This is why a lot of topical things don't get absorbed. Lotions, creams, they're not being absorbed into your skin and into your blood vessels because that requires certain molecules to get them in there. Most of those things are staying right on your skin, especially cheaper lotions. I'm a massage therapist. I've been a massage therapist, Wake Tech grad here, for 14 years. People all the time will use, especially kind of cheaper lotions, tend to have a lot of alcohol in them, and it helps them to evaporate, and it just kind of defeats that purpose. But again, sunblock, things like that. There was a big thing going around about sunblock causing cancer. It does not. It does not absorb into your skin. It stays right there on the surface and adds that protective layer, because only certain things are transferred. Nicotine patches, when you see people kind of putting nicotine patches on there, pain patches, hormonal creams, that's a very popular one, is to use kind of testosterone and estrogen supplements in a cream or lotion. Those have a chemical that helps them to be brought into the skin. It's very popular, very common way, because it's a controlled, slow release of medications into the bloodstream. It's not as, with digesting meds, taking meds in, your digestive system plays a role in how long they're going to be effective, which is why, Tylenol, or ibuprofen, it usually says something like 4 to 6 hours, you take your medicine. Well, depending on your body, it might be a little bit more. With transdermal patches, we can be more accurate with that delay of delivery. So skin is involved in temperature regulation. Again, that's what that sweating is used for. Sweating helps to cool us down. And so it's the major organ for thermoregulation is our skin. We have a lot of capillaries in our dermis. Again, it's our largest organ, so it has typically a large blood supply. And we have sweat glands. So both of these things are going to contribute to thermoregulation. When you get really hot, your blood vessels dilate, your skin gets really red and flush, and literally the heat that's in your blood is going to start to go away. It's going to start to dissipate out. By having the blood vessels that are really superficial be as vasodilated as they can, you're losing a lot of heat through your blood. Versus the opposite, whether right now it's very, very cold outside, when it's really cold, your superficial blood vessels, your dermal blood vessels, are going to constrict, and instead of bringing blood to those areas, they're going to start to draw blood away from those areas, deeper into your structures, deeper into your muscles, your organs, to be able to conserve the body heat. When they do that, once blood starts to leave the superficial areas, you start to get a really kind of pale color, and that pale color can start to turn blue, and that blue color can start to turn black. It's not because of the cold on the outside that's damaging your skin. It's the fact that your blood vessels have constricted and those cells are dying. They're no longer getting a blood supply that they need to protect you, to protect your body heat, to try to keep your core body heat warm. Because you can live without your fingers, your nose, the tips of your nose, your toes, those things. You can live without those things. You can't live if your brain and your heart and your kidneys and your liver get so cold that they start to freeze. So our body will sacrifice our superficial tissue layers for our deeper ones. They'll draw the blood back in, conserve that heat. And those are both ways that the blood vessels contribute to thermoregulation. Sweat is another one of those, the sweat glands producing that water, allowing it to evaporate. That's also going to reduce our heat. Immune function, like we were talking about, the dendritic cells that are embedded into our dermal and epidermal layers are going to help get rid of any pathogens. They can initiate immune responses, destroy microorganisms, any kind of bacteria. They kind of are very generic. They're not specific. And so those kind of go around and engulf anything that doesn't look like a normal body cell or body structure. It participates in surveillance against epidermal cancer cells as well. And I like this, adding that it's a active component of the body's immune system, not just a passive barrier. We will see when we get into the immune system discussion that the skin is your first line of defense against pathogens. All right, last one, sensory reception. The skin is a major sensory organ. The dermis is very innervated. Again, that means it has a lot of nerve endings, receptor nerve endings, to detect things like heat, pressure, shape, vibration, pain, all of those different things. One thing to note, we can't feel water. We don't have receptors for wet. You have receptors for texture and temperature, and those two things together can tell us that something is wet, but we don't have a hydroreceptor that's being able to say, oh, this is wet, this is dry. We do all of that based off of texture and temperature, which I thought is just very interesting. Okay. All right, let's look at some other structures of our integument. Again, think about the integument. The epidermis and dermis make up kind of those main structures. And then embedded within them, we have other kind of accessory modified structures. Things like hair, nails, and glands. So starting with nails, I love this, scale-like modifications of the stratum corneum. Nails and claws, the difference, by the way, nails cannot retract, claws can retract. So cats have claws, and dogs have nails because they can't retract those. We have nails because they're non-retractable. Some functions, protecting the distal tips of your fingernails. So we tend to do a lot of things with our hands. So by having a nail there, it adds a little bit of protection for them. It helps with grasping and gripping small objects, and fine motor tasks, trying to get in and do tiny little things. Again, think about like trying to break open a little seed packet, or trying to, go and pick through little nits in somebody's hair. Like those things are, you need to have nails for those things. So I'm only going to do a little bit of nail anatomy because I'm going to save that for let your lab instructor go into that. But three kind of big parts that you have are the nail root. This is where you can see it kind of down here. Nail root is going to be containing the matrix, which is the embedded portion that is dividing. So your nails grow out. They start kind of towards the base, towards the root, and they grow out this way. They don't grow up. I don't know if people think that they do, but they don't. The nail root is that embedded portion under the skin where nails are actually growing from. The nail body is the visible portion. This is what you would paint. Like if you paint your nails, you paint the nail body. And actually if you press on it, you can see it goes from kind of a pinker to a lighter color, and then it goes back to pink again. It's because underneath the body are all these blood vessels that you can push the blood out of and see your nail get a little lighter. And the last part is the free edge. This is what you would file or trim and shape, is that free edge of the nail. Hair is found on all body surfaces except for the palms and soles of the feet. The lips and some of the external genitalia aren't going to have any hair, but for the most part, it's evenly distributed around your body, or not evenly. Definitely not evenly. For the most part, it's distributed all around your body. It does have different types. Lanugo is the fine downy hair on a fetus. So a lot of times when you see babies that are born with hair, it's not their adult hair. It's what we call this lanugo, this fine hair. Vellus hair is the soft hair that's kind of covering, not that one, is a soft hair that's kind of all over your body, right? It has a texture, it's really good for heat trapping. And then terminal hair is what we have kind of on our head, our eyebrows. It's a little bit thicker, a little bit coarser, more protective. I'm not going to get too much into the hair structures. Three main portions though: the bulb, the root, and the shaft. So the bulb, the hair bulb, is what's actually kind of similar to the root. That's what's actually producing new hair cells. The root is the part of the hair that's below the skin, and then the shaft is the part that's above. So the bulb is the new stuff, the root extends to the surface, and then above the surface is the shaft. Again, there are more structures to your hair, things like the cortex and the cuticle. The cuticle is the outer layer of hair, of the hair cell. That's what you like see. That's what kind of gives it its color. That's if you dye your hair, you're dyeing the cuticle of the hair and adjusting that. The functions of hair, though: protection, retention, sensory reception, and visual identification. Hair, one of the big roles of hair is just telling people who they are, telling one person from another. Somebody gets a haircut and it's not what you would expect. It's one that is very different from their previous haircut. It can kind of take you a moment to be like, whoa, who is that? I love watching videos of like little kids, toddlers, babies, infants, seeing like their dad shaving his beard before and after his beard. If they've never seen somebody with their beard shaved with the facial hair, and they see them and it's like, oh, you're not my dad. That's not who I think you are. It's always kind of very funny because we don't realize how much hair really does help us to identify each other. Protection, the scalp helps to keep your, protect your head from UV radiation. It happens all the time that you see someone with like a middle part and they'll get burns along the middle parts or along the rows and everything. It's like, yeah, you need to add some sunblock up there too. Heat retention, the scalp does reduce heat loss. There's some ridiculous statistic that we lose like 10% of your heat through your head. That is not true. You have a lot more skin all over the rest of your body. You lose more heat through there. Sensory reception, so really light touch. So sometimes it's that idea that you might be laying in bed or something and you just feel something disturb your hair. It doesn't take a lot of movement to disrupt that. I had friends that were beekeepers, and I was kind of helping them with the harvest one time, and we didn't have, they gave us kind of some protection, but we weren't in like sealed suits or anything. And they said, okay, the way you know if it's a bee crawling up your leg, because you had pants on, but things can still get up there, because like I said, we weren't tying our pant legs in or whatever. And he said, okay, the best advice I have is that if you feel something crawling on you, just take a moment and say, okay, is this going down or up? If it's going down, it's probably sweat. If you feel something crawling up your leg, it's probably a bee. And don't kill it. You just gotta take your pants off. So that's just how it works. And so our sensory reception is actually very, very good in our hair. It actually has a really good sensory reception. Okay, so now let's get into the exocrine glands. So we talked about hair and nails. The glands are very important. If you remember an exocrine gland versus an endocrine gland is going to just release its secretions into the bloodstream like hormones and circulate everywhere. An exocrine gland has a duct that's going to lead directly to where it wants to release its structure. So exocrine glands have ducts that take them right where they want to be. The two exocrine glands that we're going to look at are sweat and sebaceous glands. Sweat glands and sebaceous glands. So sweat glands, again, are called sudoriferous glands. They produce sweat that's carried out through a hair follicle to be released to the surface. So these to the skin or into a hair follicle. So some of these will release into hair follicles. Some of these have a sweat pore right up through the epidermis. Sweat is approximately 99% water with some dissolved solutes. Electrolytes like sodium and chloride, some metabolites like urea and ammonia, those kind of things. And so they release these by exocytosis. They are just kind of, the gland itself stays whole. They're just releasing their secretions through that tube as they're produced. So what you need to know is that there are two types of sweat glands. You have merocrine and you have apocrine sweat glands. So merocrine are also called eccrine. You don't hear that as much. No, mostly you hear merocrine and apocrine. Merocrine and apocrine refer to how they actually release their secretions. And so that's just one of those little things to know. It's just talking about their method of function. So merocrine sweat glands, those are pretty much all over your body, anywhere along your arms, your hands, right? Your back, I get a lot of sweat glands on my back. I don't know y'all, but all over your body you have merocrine sweat glands that are going to be producing your sweat, helping with thermoregulation, active all throughout life. It takes us until about 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old, before our hypothalamus kind of sets what our temperature is. But after about 4 years old, you have a set level for, okay, if it gets colder than this temperature, I'm going to go into heat conservation. If it gets warmer than this temperature, I'm going to start sweating and getting rid of heat. So it takes us to about 3 or 4 years old before our merocrine sweat glands really kind of get activated to, okay, it's this temperature, now we release this heat. It's one of the reasons why children are so susceptible to heat changes. The other kind are your apocrine sweat glands. So the way I remember this, these only become active during puberty. They are located in the armpits, around the nipples, the pubic and anus region. So the way I remember is apocrine armpits. That's when you kind of, that's when you kind of start smelling their secretions around 12, 13, 14 years old. Once you hit puberty, your apocrine sweat glands started getting active. Because of the locations that they produce a thicker secretion. It's really good for antibacterial growth. It really kind of helps to inhibit bacteria. So that's why things like antiperspirants, you got to be careful with those because a lot of times they contain aluminum that can be harmful to you. They can clog your sweat pores because they're actually preventing that secretion from being released, which can inhibit or it can promote bacterial growth. It can inhibit your thermoregulation. So deodorants help to remove the odor, but antiperspirants are actually trying to prevent you from sweating. So it's something to look into. Make sure you're using the right thing that you want to use. Again, noticing the areas, these are the areas that tend to become kind of active and productive when we go through puberty, and part of that is because our apocrine glands are producing this thicker, cloudier secretion. The breakdown of bacteria is what contributes to odor, so that's why regular bathing is good to help make sure that we're getting rid of any of those bacteria that are starting to break down and they're not just accumulating on ourselves or our clothes. I go to the gym kind of frequently, and I don't know why people think that they can reuse the same gym shirt. It's like, oh, I go to the gym 5 days a week. I have 2 shirts and I just alternate them out and I just leave them in my bag. And at the end of the week, I'm going to wash it all. Ew. That is growing a lot of bacteria, putting them back onto your body. And so always making sure that you are kind of recycling through those things as you need to, just to help with general cleanliness and health. So those are your sudoriferous glands. Sweat glands are sudoriferous. There are three types. I'm sorry, there are two types. Your merocrine and your apocrine sweat glands. Okay? Merocrine and apocrine sweat glands. The third is a sebaceous gland, and this is your oil gland. So three types of exocrine glands. Merocrine and apocrine are your sweat glands. Sebaceous glands are the oil glands. So here you can see a hair follicle with a sebaceous gland attached kind of right up next to it. So sebaceous glands tend to release their secretions through a hair follicle. These are holocrine glands, which means that they kind of burst their cell membrane. Their cell membrane kind of explodes, and that's what it becomes part of their secretion. If you remember, cell membranes are mostly phospholipids. Lipids have that oily content to them, so that's helping to contribute to the production of your oil glands are the phospholipid membrane. And typically emptying into a hair follicle following that shaft, or following the root and the shaft up to the surface, stimulated by hormones, especially your androgens, so things like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, those puberty hormones, sex hormones. Again, they get you kind of sweating. As we hit puberty, we get a little bit smellier, we get a little bit greasier. It's from the glands that they're doing their jobs. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Sebum is going to help to lubricate hair, prevent it from cracking and drying, and it has those bactericidal properties that are going to inhibit pathogenic bacterial growth. Overactivity or blockage of these can both contribute to acne, so there's different kinds of acne, and so the sebaceous glands are really playing a role in that. It's not so much the sweat glands, although I'm sure that the sweat glands could contribute to that. Like I said, if you're breaking down bacteria and not properly cleansing as you should, that could contribute to it. Okay, two other types of glands that are not necessarily in our skin, but we still talk about here, are the ceruminous and mammary glands. Mammary glands, those are in the breasts. They produce milk for infant feeding, right? Men do have some mammary glands, but they should not be active. As a dermatologist told me, if your nipples start producing milk, please come see us. I reassured her that I absolutely would, because mammary glands are located in the breasts produce milk in lactating females. So even if a woman will have milk ducts, that doesn't mean that she's always producing, or she have mammary glands. Doesn't mean that she's constantly producing that milk. Milk is a protein. There's a lot of proteins and sugars in milk. It's energetically expensive. You don't just make it for no reason. There's typically hormonal signals that will activate these glands to get them to produce their secretions. Ceruminous glands are they're your earwax. Those are your wax glands. So they're a type of sweat gland that's only found in the ear canal, and they produce earwax that we call cerumen. It has some sebum, some dead cells to give you a waterproof barrier. It's sticky, so any kind of dirt or debris will get stuck in there. Things can't quite get in there very far. Insects, it is very true. It's always one of my big nightmares that like something's going to just crawl into my ear at night and kind of get stuck in there. And so, yeah, there's that nightmare you get to enjoy too. Okay, last page here, looking at repair and regeneration of the integumentary system. So we'll do kind of wound healing in most of the chapters, kind of how they do it specifically. So this is just kind of an overview for how it's done in the skin. If you think about your skin, it heals itself really quickly, especially depending on how superficial the injury is. If it's not even getting into the dermal layers, it's really going to only take it a little bit of time. Within hours, it can be healed. But even when you get a paper cut that goes down into the dermis, if it's not too deep, in a day or two, a couple of days, like I have like a little wound that's healing right on my pinky in there. It's in a really awkward spot. It's getting pulled and twisted a lot, but even that, in 3 or 4 days, it started to completely heal, and I forgot about it until I was just now making this statement. So the skin can heal very quickly, and integument can heal very quickly, but sometimes if we damage maybe the nerve cells or the stem cells that are creating those layers, we don't get full regeneration. So healing comes in two different types, regeneration or fibrosis. Regeneration is replacement of damaged or dead cells with functional tissue. So regeneration is going to be restoring function to that structure, whether that is producing sweat or sebum, whether it is sensation and reception, right? All those things come back fully through the process of regeneration. The other kind is fibrosis. Fibrosis occurs when regeneration isn't possible. If it's been a really deep wound, deep burn, severe wounds, deep burns, and extensive tissue destruction. So you've destroyed enough of those stem cells in your epidermis that it's not going to be able to grow back. They might have to do a graft and give you a skin graft. So with a fibrosis, instead of replacing it with functional tissue that can then differentiate and contribute to the actions that it was, you're just putting down connective tissue. It's non-functional connective tissue. Scar tissue is sometimes what we call it. So you're not really fully restoring that function. It could be that, as it says, hair follicles, glands, and sensory receptors are often absent. So it might be a patch of skin where this just is, where there should be hair and it's just bald. Or maybe there's hair, but it's numb, right? It's that one spot where it's like, if I poke that, I don't feel anything right there. And so that's just because those sensory receptors were damaged to the point of not being able to be repaired. And so that can happen. Sometimes over time it can start to, your body will create new pathways to restore that function. But a lot of times with the skin, it may not be prioritizing that because is it really necessary for you to know whether or not you have sensation right on that part of your arm? I mean, if something were crawling there, sure. But it's one of those functions that if you have deep enough damage, then we get what's called fibrosis. So make sure you remember those two things. Regeneration is restoring function, healing that restores function. Fibrosis is healing that is non-functional. So it's still healing, it's still repairing your wound, but it's just replacing it with non-functional cells. So if we do have wound healing that occurs though, and this is typically looking at regeneration, it occurs in 4 different steps. So assuming that you just got into a wound, something that just happened, stage 1 is inflammation and bleeding. So when the skin is cut, blood vessels rupture and bleed into the wound. Bleeding sounds dangerous, and if it's excessive, it really can be. But bleeding also helps to make sure that once you have a wound, once you have an open area, stuff can start to get in there. The skin, intact skin, is a really, like we said, a very good protective barrier. So when our skin is damaged and open, it's a really easy way for pathogens to get in. Same thing with like our mucous membranes through your mouth, your nose, your genitals. It's very easy for pathogens to get in that way. Once we have our skin being exposed, it's really easy for them to enter. I have multiple tattoos and piercings, and my doctor, every time I see her, she says, well, what new piercings do you have? What new tattoos do you have? Okay, show me, let me see. How long ago did you check this? Did you check that? Did you ask them this question? Because she is, and rightly so, being like, that's a path of injury, of entry for pathogens to get into your body. It's not judging for tattoos and piercings, it's making sure, okay, this is a site of vulnerability. I have gauges, I have my ears gauged, and for years, trying to stretch those a little bit bigger every time, this one would always bleed a little bit, and I would always kind of be a little nervous because it's like, okay, that could get infected very easily if I'm not really making sure that I'm cleaning out the actual plug, if I'm not making sure that I'm treating it properly, that open wound could get infected. So that initial rush of blood into an area is actually to help to make sure that pathogens aren't going down into the wound, but water pressure is pushing them back out. Blood pressure is actually pushing any pathogens back up and out of the body. It's kind of crude, but at the same time, we've got a big cut, we've got a wound, and so we need to do anything we can. So inflammation and bleeding is all about trying to get fresh blood to the area, fresh nutrients, white blood cells to the site of damage, and push any pathogens back up and out. So that way they don't go into the deeper structures and get absorbed into the bloodstream. That's what we don't want. So stage 1, helping control blood loss and begins defense against pathogens. Stage 2, you start to have a clot form and immune defense. That initial rush of blood into an area, again, is bringing fresh proteins, white blood cells, fresh nutrients, all those kind of things. But it's also going to bring clotting proteins, platelets that are going to help to reduce that blood loss. So initial rush of blood into the area, bring in some new things. Okay, now let's seal it off. We need to make sure we're not losing any more blood. So a blood clot will start to form. And what blood clots do is they actually have contractile tissue in them. They have actinomyosin tissue or cells in them. And that's going to actually start to bring the edges of the wounds together. And so you can see that the blood clot is going to start to kind of draw in these edges, these torn edges of the epidermis to try to bring them back in and form this kind of temporary barrier. It's preventing fluid loss and making sure nothing else can get in. while giving macrophages and white blood cells time to go after any pathogens. Kind of go in there and kind of make sure that there's no any bacterial cells that are overpopulating. Eventually that blood clot becomes a scab. Resist picking off your scabs. It's going to cause more scars to form. It's going to impede your recovery and repair. So resist a scab. And while I'm at it, the idea of letting wounds breathe, right? Letting a cut breathe and not putting Neosporin or not putting a Band-Aid on it, that is not true. If your doctor is giving you advice, like certain burns, that might be true for, but for the most part, if you are having an injury that you're treating at home, keep it covered. Don't expose it to the air. It doesn't need to dry out. That's exposing it to pathogens. Our body wants to keep it covered. Our body wants to keep the inside. And so try not to pick your scabs. Let them fall off naturally. That's really hard to do, I know, because they get itchy. That itchiness is a part of the healing, though, just so you know. All right, so now we get into stage 3, the tissue formation. Once you've kind of brought in the fresh healing molecules, brought in all your healing molecules, you've stopped the blood flow, you got your blood clot down, you've got the white blood cells and macrophages and started to get rid of the pathogens, it's time to start making new tissue. So we start with what's called granulation tissue. So this is kind of that initial stage of healing, kind of the initial layer of connective tissue. It's not always functional at this point, and that's okay because it can get replaced with functional tissue later on. So delicate pink tissue called granulation tissue in the deep wound. You have macrophages removing your blood clot, so you can see macrophages coming in here, just starting to kind of digest and break down any of the stored structures in your blood clot. New connective tissue filling the wounds and filling the space. You can kind of see this light pink tissue, these fibroblasts producing their fibers. And then because you have more blood vessels starting to be reduced, you have oxygen and nutrients coming in as well. So all of those things helping to contribute to repair. The last step is regeneration and fibrosis. So this is again where you kind of determine, okay, is this going to be full regeneration or is it just going to be a fibrosis healing? So it's fibrosis that scar tissue kind of stays what it is. It stays as collagen, non-functional tissue and doesn't get replaced with anything. If we have regeneration happening, the epithelial cells are going to kind of keep migrating and dividing, filling in those spaces. The dermal cells will start to differentiate and become their structures again, and you kind of get this renewed healing. You can also see, though, how now that we've had kind of where this damage was, the epidermis is going to be reaching further into the dermis. This, again, is kind of contributing to that fibrosis. Epidermal cells, while they are, keratinocytes and melanocytes and those things, they aren't going to be producing blood vessels. They aren't going to be producing nerve endings. And so the fact that the epidermis is reaching deeper now into the dermis than the other places were kind of is going to hint to us, okay, there will probably be some reduced function here. You might not be as sensitive in this area. Maybe you might not have as thick of hair growth in this area. Again, just depending. It's very possible because healing can continue for weeks to months. This whole process probably took place over 10 days, but then it could continue for another several weeks or months. And in that time, you can have macrophages that will come in and they'll actually break down this kind of extensive epidermis. They'll actually start to regress it back more superficially, and your dermal cells can repair themselves and regenerate their tissue as well. It may happen, it may not. It just kind of depends. Genetics and nutrition are a big part of it. All right, I think that's it for this lecture. If you have any questions, please reach out to me, but enjoy your week.